Hey everyone, thanks for joining me here today. My name is Shannon Brown. I'm a business analyst at Standards Australia, and you're listening to our new podcast called Set the Standard. So Set the Standard is a podcast that looks at emerging trends across industries that the research team are focusing on, and in those contexts where standards play a role. Today we're looking at AgTech, and we have the pleasure of interviewing Emma Weston, who is the CEO and co-founder of AgriDigital.
The reason that my co-founders and I started AgriDigital was that we had exited out from our other businesses. We came back together again and saw that there was we were at a point in time in 2015 where digitization and cloud infrastructure and cloud services were at a point where we could now start to look at these technologies as well as emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, IoT, to solve some of these really deep and entrenched problems in agriculture and across the supply chain. But it is actually, a slowly maturing industry. I mean, agriculture has been around for such a long time, obviously, as an industry. And so now the idea that there is a technology component to agriculture called AgTech that doesn't just service the farm environment, but actually through the whole agricultural supply chain, I guess is still relatively new in some ways when we have a look at the digital technologies that we're using to build out products and services and to deliver those to farmers and others. So I think on the farmer side, we are seeing good uptake. I think COVID has actually helped from that perspective, as it has with many, consumer type markets. But we also, the reality is that there is some generational, lack of affiliation with or familiarity with some of those digital technologies. So I think, what we have to do as technologists is make sure that our products are not just fit to solve the problem, but fit to be used by the user and to meet the user where they are. I think there's kind of three key drivers in the way I think about it. And, the first one is probably just the ability of the technology to solve the problem. The second is actually the driver of climate and sustainability, and thinking about the way this is impacting the supply chain as a whole, and the fact that this is not just a driver to make farming easier or farms more profitable, it's actually around the whole value chain from farmer through to consumer. I think the third one is around transparency, not just for food, but actually the whole data that underpins the movement of agricultural goods through the supply chain. Really, I mean, from an AgriDigital perspective, and you have a look at other key AgTechs in Australia, many of us are members of, the newly formed AgriTech Association, and we really see ourselves as an emerging sector in its own right, with, a very important contribution to that $100 billion target. And I think we've actually set ourselves the goal of being a $20 billion contributor. So when we're having a look at, where agriculture is coming from and going to, we think that, a fifth of that value can be generated by AgTech. The fact that supply chains are made up of, globally millions of participants, and all of those participants are actually effectively completely disconnected from each other. And so the data that underpins the efficiency of that supply chain and the value of that supply chain is completely disconnected as well. And where an AgriDigital fits in is to start joining the dots between the participants, joining the dots between the data set, and then being able to effectively lift up that data or leverage that data as and when it's needed in the supply chain to improve the efficiency overall of that supply chain. Uncertainty for farmers and others who, traders and others who participate in the supply chain, so much volatility at a price level, at a climate level, so much variability that needs to be contended with. And if we can effectively minimize uncertainty by providing really clear sets of operational software that effectively in a known way gets a good from A to B and supports all of the transactional effort to get there and can provide certainty around access to finance for that transaction, then we've done our job in our view. Being an infrastructure player and you're thinking about trust, then standards have a really important role to play, because really we trust something when we know that it's going to be the same every single time, right? And standards have therefore played a role in helping us be able to build a product quicker where they exist, because we've been able to borrow from the accepted norms of a marketplace, for example, in terms of standard grades of wheat, let's say, or a standard process for recording a contract or whatever it may be. And I think that what we have seen is where there are not standards in a market, it has been more difficult to not only build out the product to fit that market, because there's actually an education process that you then have to go into with the market to understand why we don't have every single option available and why there is not, complete flexibility and the value that standards actually bring. So we definitely like to see standards in a market. It actually really helps us build out products and get adoption around those products. And I guess, I think about it in terms of also not just what we're doing, but interoperability across the ecosystem. Like we're not going to solve this problem alone. We have to do it with others. And therefore having standards, from a technical standards perspective is really important, whether they're API standards or whether they're data schema standards. We need to be able to push and pull data across the supply chain and across the various technical providers. That when you're building out novel solutions, sometimes you're running ahead of standards, and perhaps you are starting to build out the standard for the market. And I'm not saying that that's difficult, but it can be a costly endeavor. The other challenge is when something is there and accepted, but it's a very old standard and it doesn't really fit, it's not technology neutral, for example, then that standard needs to be challenged. And, you need to be able to do that in a forum and with the support of stakeholders in the industry, in order to get your product built in a way that is fit not just for the market today, but for the market tomorrow. I love this question. I mean, so much, like even just relegating myself to 3 things. It's been such an incredible learning journey for me. One of the first things is that I have started to really understand much better what I'm good at and what I'm not as good at. And to recognize that I think I used to want to be good at everything. And that effort to be good at everything is not the effort that I really need. That's right. That's wasted effort. And so, understanding what I'm good at and focusing in on what I'm good at and communicating that and making sure that I'm right. I'm not just, thinking that I'm good at something that I'm not, but, getting the feedback from the team and then focusing in on that, but being really transparent that that's what I focus in on as the CEO, I think has been really important. I think the second thing is, I've definitely learned as part of COVID that the more transparent I am as a leader and the more transparent we are as a company, the better off we are, even if the news isn't good. The third thing is to be really, really clear about our vision and to never deviate from it, and to state that and not be embarrassed or to think that I'm over communicating the vision. Like you almost can't over communicate it enough. To the team, and then it becomes your North Star for everything. You then know, should I do A or B? Well, which one is more aligned to our vision? Which one's going to help us get there? Kindness. I just have really learned that being kind is important. And that it pays you back. So maybe it's like, I don't know, kindness is the best currency there is. If we're kinder to ourselves and to others, it would pay dividends.
I just want to thank Emma Weston for coming on to our very first Set the Standard podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and take care and mind yourselves.